October 31st, 2023, Austin, Texas. The sound that came out of Leo Thorne wasn't a scream. It was the noise a piece of architecture makes when its foundation vaporizes. A sharp, guttural punch of air, like he'd been shot in the stomach. All the color, all the carefully curated confidence that had been holding him upright for the past 6 months, just drained. It pooled somewhere around his polished shoes, leaving behind a pale, trembling shell of a boy. His knees actually buckled. I want you to picture it. 1 second, he's standing there in his too-perfect navy blue suit, a young prince awaiting his coronation, a ghost of a smirk on his lips because he still, even now, believed he'd walk out of this courtroom a free man. The next second, his hands are slapping against the smooth, polished oak of the defense table, fingers scrambling for a grip on reality as his legs gave out. His expensive lawyer, a man who charged more per hour than most people make in a week, reached out to steady him, but it was too late. The monument had already crumbled. The sentence was still hanging in the air, you see. Judge Harold Whitmore had just spoken it. And the words weren't just legal terminology. They were stones, each one meticulously placed, building the walls of Leo's new world. Life, the judge had said, his voice a slow, gravelly avalanche in the dead silence of the Clark County Superior Courtroom. Without the possibility of parole. I want to ask you to do 2 quick things. First, if you're finding this story as compelling as I am, please hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Second, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I love hearing from viewers all around the world. Now, let's rewind. Let's go back to the moment just before the world ended for Leo Thorne. Because to understand the sheer, seismic force of that collapse, you have to understand the tower he'd built himself to be. In his mind, in this final second before the judge spoke, he had already won. The air in the courtroom was a solid thing, thick with the smell of old wood, stale coffee, and sweat, the cold, clammy sweat of dread, but not Leo's. His was the warm, anticipatory sweat of an athlete before the medal ceremony. He could feel the supportive, laser-focused gaze of his parents in the first row directly behind him. His father, State Senator Arthur Thorne, a man whose smile could launch campaigns, was wearing his steadfast patriarch face. His mother, Celia, a corporate litigator who could shred a witness with a glance, had her hand pressed to her lips, a statue of dignified suffering. They'd done everything. Everything. Hired the best. Managed the media. Whispered in the right ears. The narrative had been crafted, pruned, and fertilized. A tragic misunderstanding, a brilliant young man caught in a vortex of circumstance, a victim of overzealous prosecution. Leo had played his part to perfection. The respectful nods, the attentive, slightly confused expression during the technical testimony, the way he'd tear up just thinking about the tragic accident that had befallen Maya Flores. He'd even started to believe his own press. That's the trap, you see. When you're that arrogant, that used to the universe bending to your will, you start to think the rules of cause and effect are for other people. He'd listened to his lawyer's closing arguments, a masterpiece of deflection and emotional manipulation, and he'd thought, yes, that's the truth. My truth. So when Judge Whitmore cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses, Leo's spine straightened just a little. He was ready for the performance to be over. Ready for the slap on the wrist, the suspended sentence, the triumphant exit, the interviews where he'd talk about forgiveness and moving forward. The judge didn't look at the papers in front of him. He looked directly at Leo. And his eyes weren't the eyes of a man about to recite a legal formality. They were the eyes of an old architect inspecting a shoddy, dangerous building. Leo Thorne, he began, and his tone killed the last of the oxygen in the room. This court has listened to 6 months of testimony. We have seen forensics. We have heard witnesses. We have read the journal. At the word journal, Leo's mask didn't slip, it flinched. A tiny, involuntary tick beneath his left eye. That was his masterpiece. His fatal mistake. We'll get to that. But what has become undeniably clear, Judge Whitmore continued, leaning forward, his voice dropping into a confidential, devastating register, is that this was not a crime of passion or of panic. It was a clinical execution. A project. You treated a human life as a problem to be solved, and you documented your solution with the arrogance of an author who believes he is writing fiction. Leo's lawyer shifted, about to object to the characterization, but a single raised finger from the judge silenced him. This wasn't a time for procedure. This was a time for verdict. You operated under a profound and toxic delusion that your intellect, your privilege, your family's name, placed you beyond consequence. That you were the smartest person in any room, and therefore the rules did not apply. You believed you could outthink reality itself. The judge paused, letting each word hammer home. Leo's smirk was long gone. His face was a blank sheet of paper. The state asked for life, and it is the judgment of this court that they were correct. But not merely because you took a life, but because you displayed, in the planning, the execution, and the contemptuous cover-up of this act, a moral bankruptcy so complete that this society cannot risk your presence within it for a single day more than absolutely necessary. He took a final breath. Leo's world had already narrowed to the man's mouth, waiting for the word suspended, or time served, or probation. Any lifeline. Therefore, it is the sentence of this court that you be remanded to the custody of the Department of Corrections for the remainder of your natural life, with no eligibility for parole. You will die in prison. Whack. The gavel fell. The sound was small, final, like the click of a lock. And that's when the noise escaped Leo. That's when his knees gave way. That's when he looked wild-eyed toward his parents and saw not salvation, but a mirror of his own shock, their empires of influence and strategy rendered utterly, totally useless. This is how it ends for the arrogant monster. Not with a bang, but with a terrible, echoing silence that follows a sentence you never thought you'd hear. But this story isn't about the end. It's about the beginning. It's about how a 17-year-old boy from the wealthiest neighborhood in Austin looked at a girl who knew his secret and decided the most logical solution was to erase her. And it's about the one detective who looked at a perfect accident and saw the fingerprints of a perfect crime. This is the story of the monument, and of the flaw he built right into its center. A flaw called arrogance. Let's go back to the very start. To understand the fall, you have to see the height. And Leo Thorne didn't live in a world. He presided over a kingdom. His day didn't start with an alarm. It started with a curated playlist and sunlight hitting the perfectly calibrated shades of his bedroom. His bathroom mirror wasn't for checking for stray toothpaste. It was for reviewing the performance. The hair, artfully tousled. The sharp, intelligent eyes. The smile he practiced, not too wide, not too smug, just the right amount of warm, approachable confidence. He was building his brand every single morning. Then came the car. A sleek, silent European sedan, a graduation gift that was really a prop. Driving through Crestwood's winding canopy-lined streets, he'd see the landscapers working on other lawns, the moms in Lululemon heading to spin class, and he'd feel it, a quiet, unshakable certainty that he was above the machinery of ordinary life. He was the point of it all. Crestwood Preparatory Academy wasn't a school to him. It was his corporate headquarters. The hallways were his boardroom. And as he walked through them, the ecosystem reacted. Teachers gave him approving nods, seeing a future Ivy Leaguer. Classmates parted like a sea, offering up laughs at his jokes, agreement with his opinions. He collected their attention like currency. His social media feed, which he managed with the focus of a political strategist, was a gallery of this curated life. Leo volunteering at the animal shelter, Leo leading a student council meeting, Leo with a thoughtful caption about community. The comments were a chorus of praise. He'd read them sometimes, not with gratitude, but with a quiet sense of things being in their proper order. This was the monument. And its foundation was a single, toxic belief. I am the exception. People weren't people to Leo. They were instruments. His parents were useful assets, a source of funding, status, and legal firepower. His friends were an audience and a shield. Even his girlfriend, Chloe, was an accessory, chosen for her smile and her family's connections. He'd listen to them talk about their anxieties, college apps, parents fighting, self-doubt, and feel a distant, clinical pity. How exhausting it must be, he thought, to be so ordinary, to be governed by feelings instead of logic. His entire life was a closed loop of self-affirmation. Until Maya Flores broke the circuit. Maya worked in the school library. She was quiet, observant, with a sharp mind that didn't feel the need to announce itself. She was a scholarship student, which in the hierarchy of Crestwood made her practically invisible to someone like Leo. She was background noise. Until the day she wasn't. Leo had been stretched thin, senior year, legacy admissions interviews, keeping all his plates spinning. For a major history paper on geopolitical brinkmanship, he'd done something uncharacteristically sloppy. He'd plagiarized a whole section from an obscure doctoral thesis he found deep in an online academic journal. He figured no one would ever know. It was a calculated risk. Maya knew. She was the one who'd processed the interlibrary loan request for that very thesis, for a college professor across town. She remembered the distinctive turn of phrase, the unique argument. She approached him not in the hallway for a confrontation, but in the silent rows of the history section. Her voice was low, polite, but carried a steel thread. Leo, this section of your paper, it's remarkably similar to the Caldwell thesis. She wasn't accusing. She was stating a fact. She even had a printout, passages highlighted in calm, yellow ink. For a normal person, this would be a moment of panic, of shame. For Leo, it was an electric shock of pure, undiluted rage. It wasn't about the plagiarism. It was about the audacity. This girl, this nobody from the background, had the temerity to look at his work, to scrutinize it, and to find it wanting. She had dared to imply he was not perfect. He looked down at her, his practiced smile frozen on his face, but his eyes had gone cold and flat, like two stones. There's a commonality in source material, Maya, he said, his voice smooth as ice. It's called convergent analysis. I'm surprised you're not familiar with it. He watched her face. She didn't back down. She just looked disappointed. And that was infinitely worse than anger. In that moment, she ceased to be a person. She became a problem. A bug in the code of his perfect life. A single, faulty brick in his monument. And as any good architect will tell you, you don't negotiate with a faulty brick. You remove it. For a normal person, rage is a fire. It's hot, it's messy, it consumes everything and leaves ashes. For Leo Thorne, rage was a refrigerant. It cooled him down. It turned his world into a series of clean, solvable equations. The confrontation in the library didn't send him home in a shouting fury. It sent him to his desk, calm and focused. He opened a fresh notebook. On one side of the page, he began drafting an apology email to his history teacher, a masterful piece of fiction about accidental citation errors, taking full ownership. On the other side of the page, he began a different kind of draft. This was the project now. The Maya problem. He couldn't just threaten her. That was crude. Beneath him. And it left a loose end, a person with a grievance. He needed the problem to go away. Permanently. And it needed to look like nothing more than a tragic footnote in the story of Crestwood. So he observed. With the detached eye of a biologist. He noted that every Tuesday and Thursday, Maya finished her library shift at 6 p.m. Instead of taking the bus, she walked home through the Crestwood Nature Reserve, a 30-acre slice of preserved woodlands with rocky bluffs and winding trails. It was a shortcut. It was also, Leo noted as he studied the park map on his phone, very isolated. The main trail had a section called The Ridge, where the path skirted a 50-foot drop down to a dry creek bed. A safety railing was there, but it was old wood, famously wobbly. Everyone knew to be careful. A plan, elegant in its simplicity, began to crystallize. He needed an alibi, something public, unshakable. And fate, or the town council, provided it. The annual Crestwood Fall Festival was the following Thursday, a huge event in the town square with bands, food stalls, and literally everyone in town. It was from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. Perfect. His mind worked through the variables. If I am seen at the festival at 5:30, photographed, talking to people, and if Maya's body is found at the base of the bluff later that night, the time of death forensics will be broad. They'll place it in the evening. I will be, irrevocably, in the middle of a crowd. The tool wouldn't be a weapon. A weapon was evidence. The tool would be the environment. The bluff. The unstable railing. All he had to do was provide a decisive push at the right moment. He'd wear dark, common clothes, a navy hoodie, jeans. He'd bring gloves, not for fingerprints, but for grip. And he'd find a rock, a heavy one, to use not on her, but on the railing post itself. To compromise it just before she arrived, so that when she fell, the break would look old, like rotted wood finally giving way. He wrote none of this down. He didn't need to. The plan etched itself onto his memory with perfect clarity. This was just advanced problem-solving. It was logistics. The fact that the problem was a living, breathing girl. That was just a sentimental detail his superior intellect had already edited out. Thursday arrived. The town was buzzing with festive energy. Leo played his part flawlessly. He was at the festival with Chloe and a group of friends by 5:15 p.m. He bought a funnel cake, laughed at the right moments, posed for a dozen pictures that would instantly be uploaded. He was a ghost in plain sight, building his alibi in real time. At 5:50 p.m., he excused himself. "Gotta run to the men's room at the community center," he said, rolling his eyes. The porta-potties are a war zone. A believable, mundane exit. No one thought twice. The community center was on the edge of the square, closest to the trailhead into the reserve. He moved quickly, without running. He pulled the dark hoodie from his backpack, swapping it for his bright festival jacket, which he stuffed into the pack. The gloves came on. The transition was startling. 1 minute he was in the warm, golden light and noisy laughter of the festival. 2 minutes later, he was swallowed by the cool, silent gloom of the woods. The sounds of the band became a distant, tinny echo. The air smelled of damp earth and decaying leaves. He didn't feel fear. He felt a profound sense of efficiency. He was in the workspace now. He found the spot on the ridge. The railing was, as promised, weathered. He chose a heavy, jagged stone from the side of the path. He didn't swing it wildly. He placed it carefully against the base of the crucial support post, where the wood met the soil, and applied steady, immense pressure. He heard the wood splinter inside, a muffled, sickening crack. The post now leaned precariously. To a casual glance, it just looked old. But a good shove against the top railing would send the whole section pitching forward into the void. He checked his watch. 6:04 p.m. Right on schedule. He positioned himself off the path, behind a thick oak tree, and waited. He heard her before he saw her. The soft, rhythmic crunch of sneakers on the gravel path. A faint humming. She was humming a tune from the festival. Maya appeared, her head slightly down, a backpack slung over one shoulder. She was thinking about something else, tired from her shift, completely unaware that the universe had been rewritten to exclude her. As she reached the compromised section of railing, Leo stepped onto the path behind her. She turned, startled. For a second, there was confusion. Then recognition. Then, seeing his expression, the utter, blank calm, a dawning, terrified understanding. "The thing you have to understand, Maya," Leo said, his voice conversational, almost pedagogical, as if explaining a difficult concept, "is that some narratives are too important to be derailed by minor characters." She opened her mouth to scream, to reason, to say anything. But in that instant of her paralysis, he took 2 swift steps forward. He didn't push her with his hands. That would have been too personal. He planted his gloved hands on the top of the weakened wooden railing in front of her and shoved forward and down with all his weight. The wood didn't just break. It surrendered. With a loud, dry snap, the section of railing tore free. Maya, standing right against it, had no chance. The force of the failing structure swept her feet from the path. There was a gasp, cut short. A scuffle of gravel. And then, nothing. No scream. Just the sound of the railing tumbling down, crashing through the brush below, and then a final, distant thud. Leo didn't peer over the edge. He didn't need to. The equation was complete. He listened for a moment to the ringing silence. Then, he carefully picked up the rock he'd used and hurled it far into the woods in the opposite direction. He checked the ground for any sign of his shoe prints. Satisfied, he turned and walked back toward the distant glow and noise of the festival. By 6:15 p.m., he was back with his friends, accepting a cup of hot cider from Chloe. "Took you long enough," she joked. He gave her his practiced, warm smile. "You have no idea," he said, his voice a perfect mirror of the boy they all knew. The lines were crazy. He was calm. He was clean. He was, in his own mind, a genius. The edit was complete. He had removed the faulty brick. But here's the thing about genius. Sometimes it's so focused on the elegance of the solution, it becomes blind to the single, stupid human mistake. And Leo, in his cold, perfect execution, had just made one. He didn't hear it. But it was there, waiting in the darkness. The first few hours were the easiest. Leo went home that night, slept a deep, untroubled sleep, the sleep of a job well done. When he woke up on Friday, the world was unchanged. The sun still shone over Crestwood. His phone was filled with notifications about festival photos. He scrolled through them, pausing at one where he was laughing, a cup of cider in hand. The timestamp read 6:22 p.m. A perfect, digital alibi, smiling out from the heart of a crowd. The first ripple appeared mid-morning. A murmur in the hallway before first period. "Have you seen Maya? She didn't show up for her shift at the library this morning." It was a curiosity, not a crisis. Maybe she was sick. By afternoon, the ripple became a wave. Maya's mother had called the school, then the police. Her daughter never came home last night. She wasn't answering her phone. This wasn't like her. Not at all. A quiet anxiety began to seep through the halls of Crestwood Prep. It was a novel feeling for a community where the biggest crisis was usually college decision drama. Teachers made hushed phone calls. Students huddled in groups, their voices low. A missing girl. Here. Leo observed it all with clinical interest. He adjusted his performance in real time. In the cafeteria, he sat with a group that included Chloe and a few others. He let the concerned chatter flow around him before leaning in, his brow furrowed with just the right amount of thoughtful worry. "You know," he said, his voice low and serious, "I saw her after the festival. Well, not saw her, but I was near the trailhead when I went to the community center. I think she might have been heading into the reserve." He let that hang, a helpful citizen offering a clue. Then he added the crucial, subtle poison. "She seemed, I don't know, preoccupied. Stressed lately, maybe." He saw the idea take root. Nodding heads. Stressed. Preoccupied. Words that could easily bend towards troubled, and then towards ran away, or did something reckless. By the time the police, a young, out-of-his-depth deputy from the county sheriff's office, arrived to ask preliminary questions, the narrative was already hardening. Leo gave his statement with polite, cooperative concern. Yes, he'd been at the festival. Yes, he'd seen Maya earlier in the week, and she did seem a bit off. No, he hadn't seen anything suspicious. He was just so worried. On Saturday, the search parties organized. It was a community spectacle. News vans parked on the picturesque streets. Volunteers in bright vests gathered in the school parking lot. And there, front and center, was Leo Thorne. He handed out bottled water. He offered to lead a group of students along the perimeter trails. He became the face of youthful, compassionate leadership in a crisis. He walked the very trails he'd walked 2 nights before, now in the bright daylight. He pointed helpfully into thickets. He called Maya's name with a convincing blend of hope and desperation. Inside, he felt a soaring, electric thrill. This was the ultimate proof of his genius. He was not just getting away with it, he was being applauded for his reaction to it. The monument wasn't just standing, it was being polished by the very people mourning the brick he'd removed. It was late Saturday afternoon when a shout echoed through the wooded canyon. It wasn't a call of hope. It was a sharp, pained cry. A park ranger, part of the official search team, had rappelled down the bluff at the ridge to check the creek bed. He found what was left of the broken railing. And a few yards away, He found Maya. The news traveled through the volunteers like a cold wind. They found her. It's not good. The official word, delivered by the tired-looking sheriff at a hastily arranged press conference, was exactly what Leo had engineered: a tragic accident. The preliminary finding was that the old safety railing gave way while she was hiking. A terrible, freakish piece of bad luck. The community would mourn, investigate the safety of the other trails, and slowly move on. At the impromptu candlelight vigil held at the school that Sunday night, Leo was asked to speak. He stood before the weeping crowd, the flickering light playing on his handsome, somber face. His voice broke just right as he talked about a bright light gone too soon, and holding our loved ones close. He didn't smirk. He didn't have to. The victory was absolute. He had turned a murder into a tragedy. He had turned himself from a killer into a consoler. As he blew out his candle that night, he believed the story was over. The edit was clean. The page had been turned. But in the shadows, a single unanswered question lingered, whispered by a girl with tear-streaked cheeks to a friend after the vigil. But why was she even on the ridge? She hated that trail. She always said the railing gave her the creeps. It was a small question. A stupid, human, emotional question. The kind of question Leo's logic never accounted for. And it was the first tiny thread, waiting to be pulled. The story should have ended there. In most places, it would have. A tragic accident in a wealthy town where everyone is eager to believe the best, to tidy up the horror and move on. But Crestwood had one piece of bad luck Leo hadn't factored into his equations: a political spat at the county level. The sheriff was up for re-election. His handling of the Crestwood accident was being quietly criticized by opponents as lackluster. To prove his department's thoroughness, he made a show of requesting a fresh set of eyes from the nearby Metro Police, a purely political move. He expected a rubber stamp. What he got was Detective Evelyn Reed. Reed arrived on a Tuesday morning, a week after the funeral. She didn't look like a disruptor. She was in her late 40s, with a calm, tired face and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She'd been encouraged to take a temporary transfer after exposing corruption in her own city's narcotics unit. She was, in bureaucratic terms, a problem. And now she was Crestwood's problem. She didn't go to the station first. She went to the bluff. While the local deputies saw a tragic accident scene, Reed saw a narrative. She stood at the break in the railing, not looking down, but looking at it. The broken ends of the wood. The way it fell. The railing gave way outward, she said to the young deputy accompanying her, her voice quiet. Yeah, he said. Poor kid must have been leaning on it. Maybe, Reed murmured. But if you're leaning on a rickety railing and it goes, you fall backward, onto the path. Your instinct is to recoil from the drop. To fall forward, over it, the railing has to push you. Or... She didn't finish the thought. She walked the path, her eyes on the gravel. A few feet back from the break, partly obscured by a fern, she saw a scuff mark. Not a slide from a falling foot, but a sharp, clean gouge in the dirt and stone. Like something with a hard, straight edge had been driven into it with force. She took out her phone and snapped a picture. Next, she went to the medical examiner's office. The report said, massive blunt force trauma consistent with a fall. But Reed focused on the specifics. The fractures. The lacerations. She compared the ME's photos to pictures of the creek bed below the bluff. See this, she said, pointing to a deep, jagged tear on Maya's scalp. The primary impact site. The rock she hit down there is jagged, yes. But it's also flat. This wound has a concave curve. Like she hit something rounded first. Something like, her finger traced the broken end of the railing in a crime scene photo. A falling log. The deputy shifted uncomfortably. You think the railing hit her on the way down? I think, Reed said, closing the file. It's odd that the thing that supposedly caused her fall also managed to strike her head with enough force to create a primary impact wound before she hit the ground. Almost like the railing was falling with her. Or just ahead of her. The word homicide entered her mind, cool and clear. It was no longer an accident scene. It was a crime scene. She had it reclassified. Her first interview with the Thorne family was a masterpiece of tension wrapped in polite procedure. She met them in their pristine living room, all chrome and uncomfortable white furniture. The senator was cordial, dismissive. The mother was brittle, protective. And then there was Leo. He was perfect. Poised, respectful, his grief for his classmate seemingly deep but appropriately restrained. He walked her through his festival alibi with flawless recall, even offering to pull up the photos on his phone. "And you went to the community center restroom?" Reed asked, watching his eyes. "Yes, ma'am. The lines at the porta-potties were insane." "What time was that?" "About 5:50, maybe. I was back with my friends by 6:15. "And on your way to the community center, did you see Maya Flores?" Leo paused, as if searching his memory. "You know, I think I might have seen someone with her build near the trailhead. But I wasn't sure. It was getting dark." Reed nodded slowly. He was good. Too good. His answers were rehearsed, comprehensive. He was offering information she hadn't asked for, a classic sign of a prepared narrative. A truly grieving, shocked witness has gaps. They say, "I don't know." They get times confused. Leo's story was seamless. "You two had a disagreement recently, is that right?" Reed asked, her tone casual. "About a paper?" A flicker. So fast a normal person would miss it. The temperature in his eyes dropped from polite warmth to absolute zero for a fraction of a second. Then the concerned mask snapped back. "A misunderstanding," he corrected gently. "It was resolved. I felt awful about it." As Reed left the Thorne house, she felt the familiar cold itch at the base of her spine. The itch that meant she was being played. The senator had tried to end the interview twice. The mother had watched her son like a hawk. And the boy was a vault. No cracks. Only polished, reinforced steel. But Detective Evelyn Reed didn't need cracks to know something was hollow inside. She just needed to find the right frequency to make it resonate. And as she drove away, she knew two things for certain. Maya Flores had been murdered. And the most obvious, perfect, smiling piece of the puzzle was sitting in that white living room, believing he was the smartest person in the room. He was about to learn he wasn't. The unraveling had begun. Detective Reed's strategy wasn't to batter down Leo's walls. It was to quietly flood the ground beneath them, one drop at a time, until the foundation turned to mud. Her first move was to make his world smaller. She re-interviewed everyone in his orbit, but with a new, sharpened focus. She didn't ask about the night of the festival. She asked about Leo, his habits, his temperament, his misunderstandings. Chloe, his girlfriend, sat nervously in the school conference room Reed had commandeered. "He's amazing," she insisted, but her eyes were unsure. "He's just driven. He hates to be wrong." "Did he ever talk about Maya Flores?" Reed asked, her voice soft. A hesitation. "After that thing with the paper, he said she was a gatekeeper. That she liked to feel superior by catching people out." It was a small poisoned dart, perfectly launched by Leo and now lodged in Chloe's memory. Reed interviewed Maya's friends next. The quiet girl who'd asked the question at the vigil was more certain now. She was scared of that trail. A branch snapped there once, and she nearly jumped out of her skin. She'd take the longer way every time. The most damning piece came from the school's network administrator, a man bored enough to dive deep into Reed's request. He pulled the login logs for the academic journal database. Leo Thorne had accessed the obscure Caldwell thesis not once, but 17 times over 2 weeks before the paper was due. This wasn't a last-minute citation error. It was systematic harvesting. Reed was constructing a portrait of a brilliant, vindictive narcissist. But portraits aren't evidence. She needed the brick that would shatter the stained glass window of his accident story. She went back to the scuff mark on the trail. She had the county's forensics team cast it. The result was a perfect, negative space impression of a rock. Not any rock. A rock with a distinct, sharp-angled corner and a peculiar, grooved texture on one face. Reed took the cast and spent a day at the ridge, not looking down, but looking at the ground around. She was searching for the rock's positive match. 50 feet from the bluff, partly buried in leaf litter where it had been tossed, she found it. It was heavier than it looked. And on one face, worn smooth by time and elements, were those same distinct grooves. This rock hadn't tumbled down the bluff. It had been placed. And the only logical reason to place a heavy rock at the base of a wooden post was to compromise it. This was premeditation, carved in stone. While Reed was gathering her stones, Leo was spinning new webs. He could feel the pressure, the subtle shift in the hallways. The questions were getting more specific. Chloe was acting weird. He saw Reed's unmarked car in the school lot. His arrogance metabolized this not as a threat, but as a complex, stimulating challenge. The police were stuck in the physical world. He lived in the digital one. It was time to build a better alibi. He targeted a friend, Ben, who was technologically oblivious. One night, while Ben was asleep, Leo used a simple phishing link he'd sent days earlier, disguised as a gaming video, to gain remote access to Ben's computer. He navigated to Ben's messaging app. With cold precision, he fabricated a conversation. He copied Ben's writing style, his slang. He created a time-stamped exchange from 6:05 p.m. on the night of the festival. Ben, 6:05 p.m. Hey man, where'd you go? Chloe's looking for you. Leo, 6:07 p.m. still in line for the bathroom at the community center. This is insane. Ben, 6:09 p.m. Lol brutal. Hurry up, they're about to do the pie contest. It was a tiny, digital miracle. It placed him at the community center, away from the trail, at the exact moment Maya was dying. He then sent a few harmless messages from his own phone to Ben the next morning, pushing the fabricated conversation up in Ben's message history, making it feel old and natural. When Reed called Ben in for a chat, the boy volunteered the alibi freely. Yeah, we were messaging him while he was in line. He was stuck there forever. Reed noted it down without reaction. But later, in the tech lab of the Metro department, she handed the data over to a specialist, a woman named Lynn who lived in the binary guts of phones. This feels like a painting, Reed said. Too perfect. Check the brushstrokes. Leo, meanwhile, felt a surge of triumph. He had outmaneuvered them. He'd woven his alibi directly into the perception of a witness. He was no longer just a suspect. He was a playwright, and they were all reading his script. The pressure didn't crush him. It made him feel more powerful, more real. He started taking greater risks. He'd make eye contact with Reed in the hallway and offer a polite, bland smile, a king acknowledging a useful servant. He was enjoying the game. He didn't know that in the quiet of the tech lab, Lynn was running a program that compared metadata packets, the hidden, uneditable DNA of digital communication. And she'd just found a single, microscopic anomaly. The timestamp on Ben's message had been inserted, not generated in real time. The digital equivalent of a seam in forged paper. It was the first crack in the vault. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a quiet electronic click in the dark, signaling that the lock was about to be picked. The problem with building a monument to yourself is that eventually, you can't help but stop and admire it. Detective Reed sat in her borrowed office, the walls papered with timelines, maps, and photos. In the center was Leo's senior portrait, smiling. She'd been staring at it for an hour, listening to the hum of the fluorescent lights. The digital forgery was a gift. It proved he was scared, that he felt the need to reinforce his alibi. But it was defensive, a reaction. She needed to go on the offensive. She needed to understand the why behind the how. She called in a favor from her old precinct, a forensic psychologist named Dr. Alves. She sent him the file, the plagiarism, the coldly executed crime, the fabricated messages, the smug interviews. "Who am I looking at?" she asked. 2 days later, Alves called, his voice crisp. "You're looking at a textbook grandiose narcissist in the purest, most dangerous form. This isn't about emotion. It's about ego as a cosmic principle. He doesn't believe he broke a law. He believes he transcended it. How does that help me find evidence?" Reed asked, tracing the outline of Leo's photo. Because for this type, Alves said, the crime isn't complete with the act. The act is just the first draft. The real satisfaction comes from the review, the admiration of their own work. They are the artist and the intended audience. They often create a record. Not for leverage, not for memory, for appreciation. They can't help it. It's the signature on the masterpiece. A record. A trophy. Not a lock of hair or a piece of jewelry, something too crude, too common. For a digital native, a genius who lived in the cloud, the trophy would be digital. A journal. A manifesto. A private gallery of his own brilliance. It was the click she'd been waiting for. The psychological key. Leo Thorne wouldn't have just killed Maya Flores. He would have documented it. While Reed had her breakthrough, Leo was experiencing a kind of euphoria. The initial pressure had melted away. The news cycle had moved on. His parents had hired a formidable, sleek attorney who assured them this was all a formality, a political game by a detective trying to make a name for herself. Life was returning to its proper rhythm. This overconfidence was the fertilizer for his fatal flaw. It happened on a Tuesday night. He was supposed to be studying for a calculus exam. Instead, he found himself navigating to a heavily encrypted, private cloud drive, a digital vault hidden behind multiple layers of passwords and dummy files. He labeled it with a title only he would understand, Project Parallax, a reference to the apparent shift in an object's position when viewed from different lines of sight. In his mind, it was poetic. He'd shifted Maya out of his line of sight. He opened a file simply named analysis.txt, and he began to read his own words. Entry 1. The variable m has become an active contaminant. Her function in the equation is now negative. Elimination isn't malice. It's arithmetic. The method must be elegant. A collapse of environment. An edit that looks like nature's erasure. Asterisk entry 3. Festival variable provides optimal crowdsourced alibi. The timing is precise. The tool is the site itself. The ridge. The compromised railing. No foreign materials. No transfer. Only gravity and poor maintenance. Asterisk. Entry 5. Execution was clean. The sound was satisfactory. A terminal thud. The variable has been zeroed out. The aftermath performance is critical. Grief must be modeled, not felt. They are all watching the character now. The character is flawless. He read on, a faint, cold smile on his face. It was genius. So clean. So logical. He was the only person alive who could ever appreciate the sheer intellectual beauty of it. He was his own god, admiring the creation of a perfect world from which he had removed a flaw. He felt a surge of power so intense it was like a drug. This was his true trophy. Not a physical object, but the pristine, untouchable record of his superiority. He didn't know that across town, Detective Reed was presenting her theory to a skeptical county prosecutor. He wrote it down. I don't know where. A hidden diary, an encrypted file. He had to. It's the only thing that makes sense for his profile. It's circumstantial, the prosecutor sighed. The rock is good. The forged messages are good. But without a murder weapon or a direct witness, it's a steep climb. Find me the journal, Evelyn. Then we'll talk murder one. As Leo closed his vault that night, feeling invincible, he made one final, arrogant mistake. He was texting with a friend from the debate team, mocking the plotting police investigation. He typed a line, a joke just for himself. Reed's running in circles looking for a motive. She'd need a psychic to find it. He meant it as a celebration of his own security. But the text was intercepted, part of a broader, quiet subpoena of his communications Lynn had initiated. The text itself proved nothing. But the tone, the smug, dismissive, guilty tone, was another brushstroke in the portrait Reed was painting. And in that same data stream, Lynn found something else. Tiny, automated packets of data, sent weekly from Leo's laptop to an encrypted server with a foreign IP address. A backup service. A digital heartbeat. The journal had a pulse. And they had just found the vein. And just like that, the hunt turns. The detective has her theory, and the killer has his trophy. But between them lies a vault of encrypted secrets. Will Reed crack it before Leo realizes he's left a digital door ajar? Make sure you're subscribed and have notifications on, because in Act 2, the unmasking begins, and you won't want to miss the moment this arrogant monster realizes the walls are closing in. Drop a comment below with your theory. Does Leo's journal become his confession? Public perception is a storm, and Leo Thorne had always been the calm, golden eye at its center. But now, the winds were shifting. It started with a headline in the Metro section of the newspaper, not quite front page, but visible enough. Questions linger in Crestwood accident as police probe intensifies. It mentioned a re-examination of evidence, and, in the fourth paragraph, noted that friends of the victim dispute the characterization of her state of mind. No names were named, but in a town like Crestwood, everyone knew. The change was subtle, but Leo felt it. The approving nods in the hallway became hesitant half-smiles. The easy invitations to parties dried up. He was no longer just the tragic hero of a community crisis. He was a topic of conversation. A question mark. His monument was under a slow, public audit. His parents felt it too. Senator Thorne's campaign managers started advising a period of quiet family focus. The sleek attorney's assurances became tighter, more legalistic. The walls of the Thornes' pristine world were no longer soundproof. The climax of this pressure came at the Crestwood Prep Spring Fundraiser Gala, the year's biggest social event. It was a command performance. The family had to be seen, had to project unshakable normalcy. Leo wore his best suit, his smile practiced to a fine edge. But it was like wearing a coat made of lead. He worked the room with his mother, shaking hands, making small talk. He could feel the stares like tiny pinpricks on the back of his neck. The conversations would hit a familiar, awkward lull. "How are you holding up, Leo?" people would ask, their eyes searching his for a crack, not out of concern, but out of hunger for the story. He was in the middle of explaining his college plans to a bored-looking alumnus when he saw her. Detective Evelyn Reed stood just inside the ballroom doors, out of place in a simple blazer amidst the sea of sequins and tuxedos. She wasn't there for the chicken piccata. She was observing. Her eyes swept the room and landed on him, cool and assessing. A bolt of pure, white-hot anger shot through Leo. How dare she? How dare she invade this space, his space, with her suspicions and her quiet, wrecking ball presence? This was his world. These were his people. The alumnus was droning on about endowment funds. Leo's smile felt like a physical ache, a muscle stretched too far. He nodded robotically, his entire focus tunneled on Reed across the room. She met his gaze and gave a small, unreadable nod. Not a greeting. An acknowledgement. "I see you." And that's when it happened. The mask, the magnificent, painstakingly crafted mask of the grieving, upstanding golden boy, slipped. For 1 second, one devastating, unguarded second, the pleasant blankness fell away. His eyes narrowed, his jaw set into a hard, ugly line. The expression that flashed across his face wasn't fear or guilt. It was something much simpler, and much more telling, a profound, seething hatred. It was the look of a king watching a peasant trample his rose garden. A pure, unfiltered glimpse of the arrogant monster within, furious at the audacity of the hunt. Then, just as quickly, he smoothed his features back into placid neutrality. He turned back to the alumnus, made an excuse, and melted into the crowd, his heart hammering against his ribs. But it was too late. A news photographer from the society pages, capturing shots of the glittering event, had been framing a shot of the senator's son. His camera's rapid burst mode had caught it all. The polite smile, the turn, the icy glare across the room, the recovery. It was a sequence of 4 frames. A story in pictures. The photographer, reviewing his shots later that night, didn't miss it. He saw the story, too. He sent the most damning frame, the one of Leo, face frozen in that contemptuous glare, to his editor with a 2-word note. Front page. The next morning, it wasn't on the front page. It was everywhere. Online, on social media, on cable news chirons, smile of suspicion? The caption read, Leo Thorne, son of State Senator Arthur Thorne, at a charity gala as police continue to investigate the death of classmate Maya Flores. The narrative had officially and publicly broken. The monument wasn't just cracked. A piece of it had fallen off for the whole world to see. And in that frozen moment of naked spite, people didn't see a grieving classmate. They saw a boy who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else but in a room full of people asking questions. The photograph changed everything. It was no longer a quiet investigation. It was a public spectacle. And in the sudden harsh glare of that spotlight, people began remembering things. A classmate recalled Leo making a cold joke about the safety of the trails weeks before the festival. A teacher remembered his unervingly calm reaction when initially questioned about the plagiarism. The librarian confirmed Maya had been perfectly cheerful when she left work that night. The story Leo had built, the stressed girl, the tragic accident, was rotting from the inside out. But for Detective Reed, public opinion wasn't evidence. The rock, the forged messages, the glare. They were bricks, but the wall they built wasn't high enough to reach a murder conviction. She needed the journal. The masterpiece itself. Lynn, the tech specialist, had become obsessed. The encrypted server with the foreign IP was a fortress. It's like he's using a bank vault to store a diary, she told Reed, her eyes bloodshot from staring at lines of code. The encryption is military grade. We can't crack it with brute force. We need the key. The key lived in only one place, Leo Thorne's mind. And in the devices he used. Reed got a warrant for a full forensic mirror of Leo's laptop and phone. Not just his files, but his habits. Lynn created a digital twin of his systems in her sterile lab, a ghost machine. They watched how the ghost operated. They saw the weekly automated backup to the foreign server, a silent, dutiful heartbeat. But they also found the echoes of his arrogance. Lynn noticed something in the ghost's browser history. Leo frequented a high-end puzzle forum, a place for riddles and ciphers. His username was Parallax View. In his posts, he boasted about creating unguessable passwords from personal mnemonics. He described his method. Take a core personal truth, a line from a favorite book, and a number meaningful only to you, then scramble them with specific symbols. It's a recipe, Lynn said, a spark in her eyes. He told us how to bake the cake. We just need the ingredients. Reed provided the ingredients. The core truth. His narcissism. The journal's project name was Project Parallax. The favorite book. Reed had his school reading lists. One title stood out, The Art of War by Sun Tzu. Leo had written a paper calling it The Ultimate Text on Strategic Dominance. The meaningful number. The date of the festival, perhaps. Or maybe the date he decided. The date of the library confrontation. They worked in the silent, tense hours of early morning. Lynn built an algorithm, a digital locksmith, that tried every combination of these elements. Parallax, phrases from the art of war, dates, and the specific symbol pattern he favored. 4 hours. Nothing. The server repelled every attempt. Reed watched the screen, the glow etching lines of fatigue on her face. Hope felt like a shrinking pool of light. Then, at 4:17 a.m., Lynn let out a soft, sharp breath. Not a shout. A hiss of triumph. On her main screen, a string of gibberish resolved into a plain-text password. The algorithm had landed on the right sequence. Parallax_victory 20. 3_October 19. October 19th. The day of the library confrontation. The day the project was conceived. We're in, Lynn whispered. The vault door swung open in the digital ether. Inside wasn't a single file, but a sparse, chilling directory. A few text documents. One was named analysis.txt. With a click that sounded as loud as a gunshot in the quiet lab, Lynn opened it. Reed leaned in, her eyes scanning the text. For a moment, she said nothing. The only sound was the hum of the servers. Then, slowly, she began to read aloud, her voice flat, disbelieving. Entry 7. Post-event analysis confirms efficiency. The variable, m, has been neutralized. The environmental edit is holding. The collective is consuming the tragedy narrative. Their grief is a useful fog. Asterisk. She scrolled. Entry 9. The investigator, Reed, is a predictable variable. She looks for physical causality. She does not understand I am operating on a higher logical plane. Her suspicion is an irritant, but not a threat. It is, in fact, a validation of the complexity of the design. Lynn opened another file. Contingencies XT. It outlined plans to discredit Maya posthumously, to frame a transient, to create more digital ghosts if needed. But it was the final entry, dated the day after the gala photograph, that sealed it all. Entry 12. The insect thinks it has stung the king. Their cameras, their whispers. They see the mask, and they think they see me. They are blind. This is still my narrative. When this ends, and it will end with my victory, I will write the final analysis of their failure. This journal will be the proof of a perfect system. Reed stopped reading. The room was ice cold. It was all there. The planning. The cold-blooded execution. The contempt. The sheer, godlike arrogance. It wasn't a confession. It was a victory lap written before the race was over. It's a map, Reed said, her voice husky. A map of a murder. And he drew it for himself. She looked at Lynn. Print it. Every page. Chain of custody on the digital files. I need to wake up a judge. The sun was just beginning to lighten the gray sky outside when Detective Evelyn Reed walked out of the tech lab, a thin, warm ream of paper in her hands. It felt heavy. Not with the weight of pages, but with the weight of a boy's monstrous, self-worshipping soul. In his need to admire his own genius, Leo Thorne had built the one thing he never expected, a bridge straight from his mind to the prosecution's table. The key had been his arrogance. The lock was now open, and on the other side was a life sentence. Detective Reed didn't want to arrest Leo Thorne in the quiet of his home. That was a private collapse. She wanted the public one. She wanted the kingdom to see the king deposed. She coordinated it for a Tuesday, second period, when the hallways of Crestwood Prep were full. She parked the unmarked sedan right in the senior lot, in the space next to his shiny European car. She didn't get out alone. 2 uniformed county deputies flanked her, their presence a shock of navy blue and polished badge against the spring morning. The principal, a pale man with a sweating forehead, met them at the main doors, wringing his hands. Reed handed him the arrest warrant. "We'll be quick and discreet," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. Word travels through a high school faster than light. By the time Reed pushed open the door to Mr. Shanley's AP calculus class, a strange electric hush had already fallen over the hallway. Dozens of students lined the lockers, phones held low, recording. Inside the classroom, Leo was at the whiteboard, solving a complex integral. He was in his element, explaining a step to the class, the dry marker in his hand like a scepter. He saw Reed first in the reflection of the polished board. His hand froze. The confident line of X's and Y's stuttered to a stop. Every head in the room swiveled to the door. "Leo Thorne," Reed said. Her voice was clear, calm, and carried to the back row. "I have a warrant for your arrest for the murder of Maya Flores. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." For a second, there was only the hum of the fluorescent lights. Leo stood perfectly still, his back to the room, staring at his own half-solved equation. The monument, in its final moment. Then he broke. It wasn't a quiet surrender. It was a reactor going critical. He spun around, the marker clattering to the floor. "You can't do this." His voice was a raw, adolescent crack, all polished baritone gone. "My father is—" "I have spoken with your father," Reed interrupted, her tone glacial. "He has been served with the warrant. Turn around, Leo. This is a mistake. You have nothing." He was shouting now, his face flushing a deep, ugly red. The performance was utterly gone. This was the real Leo, a furious, cornered child whose toys were being taken away. He looked past her to his classmates, to the phones in the hallway. He saw his audience, But for the first time, he wasn't performing for them. He was unraveling in front of them. One of the deputies stepped forward. "Sir, turn around and put your hands behind your back. Don't you touch me!" Leo shrieked, taking a step back, bumping into the whiteboard. He looked wild, unhinged. The golden boy was gone. In his place was a stranger with terrified, animal eyes. Reed gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. The deputies moved in. What followed wasn't a violent struggle, but a pathetic, desperate one. Leo flailed, twisting his arms away as they tried to grasp his wrists. He didn't throw a punch. He just writhed, like a toddler in a tantrum, all dignity incinerated by panic. It took them less than 10 seconds to secure his hands in cold, metal cuffs behind his back. The click echoed in the silent classroom. That sound seemed to break the last of his spirit. His shoulders slumped. He stopped yelling. He hung his head, his hair falling over his face. A low, guttural sound escaped him, not a sob, but a groan of pure, world-ending defeat. Reed stepped close to him, her voice for his ears only. "We found it, Leo. We read your journal. Project Parallax." He jerked his head up. His eyes locked onto hers, wide with a new kind of horror. Not the fear of being caught, but the terror of a god whose secret prayers have been read aloud. His masterpiece. His private, worshipful trophy. They had it. In that moment, he didn't see a detective. He saw a profane intruder in the temple of his own mind. They led him out. The hallway was a tunnel of silent, staring faces and raised phone screens. The light of his kingdom was now the brutal, unforgiving glare of 100 witnesses. He kept his head down, hiding his face, but it was too late. The video was already uploading. The fall was being broadcast in real time. Outside, as they guided him toward the squad car, he saw his mother's black SUV screech to a halt at the curb. Celia Thorne exploded from the passenger seat, her composure shattered. "Leo, don't say a word. Don't you say anything," she yelled, her voice shrill. His father was on the phone in the driver's seat, his face ashen, staring straight ahead, already miles away in some legal strategy session. They put Leo in the back of the car. He didn't look at his mother. He stared straight ahead through the glass, seeing nothing. As the car pulled away, Reed stood on the steps of the school. The principal was babbling about procedures. She ignored him. She took out her own phone. She had one more call to make. To the district attorney. And to a trusted reporter. By the time Leo Thorne was booked, fingerprinted, and placed in a cold holding cell to await his arraignment, the damning, soul-chilling excerpts from Analysis XT were already leading the evening news. The journal, his sacred testament to his own genius, had been leaked. The world wasn't just watching his arrest. They were reading his thoughts. The monument wasn't just fallen. It had been published, annotated, and held up for the whole world to see exactly what rotten material it was made of. The collapse was complete. And the trial hadn't even begun. The courtroom for the state versus Leonardo Thorne didn't feel like a place of justice. It felt like a theater on opening night, packed, breathless, and charged with a terrible gravity. On one side sat the citizens of Crestwood, Maya's family a silent, aching wound in the front row. On the other, Leo's parents, their faces now permanent masks of grim, expensive defiance. And in the center, Leo. He had tried to rebuild the monument for this, his most important performance. His suit was somber, tailored. His hair was perfect. He listened to the opening arguments with an expression of pained, focused concentration, the wronged scholar trying to follow a complex lie. His new defense team, a trio of legal sharks, had one mission: make the journal seem like anything but what it was. Their argument was a masterpiece of distortion. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," his lead attorney boomed, "what the state calls a confession, we call a tragedy. You will see the writings of a profoundly gifted, deeply troubled young man grappling with intrusive thoughts, with a dark fantasy life born of immense academic pressure. He wrote a story. A horrible, shocking story. But he did not live it. They were going to argue fiction. A twisted creative writing project. It was the only move they had. For days, the prosecution methodically laid the physical bricks of the case. The rock and the scuff mark. The timeline placing him near the trail. The forged digital alibi. It was a strong, solid wall. But Leo's team chipped at it with skilled doubt. Could the rock have rolled? Could the time of death be broader? Could the digital anomaly be a glitch? You could see Leo's confidence, that vile, familiar glint, begin to return to his eyes as his lawyers worked. They were creating fog. And in fog, monsters can hide. Then, the prosecution called Leo Thorne to the stand. A gasp rippled through the room. It was a gamble. His attorneys objected violently. But Leo, after a frantic, whispered conference, agreed. He couldn't help it. This was his stage. This was his chance to outsmart everyone in the ultimate arena. To perform the truth out of existence. At first, he was good. Scary good. He answered questions about the plagiarism with shame-faced honesty. He spoke of Maya with a fragile, respectful sadness. He explained the journal as a pressure valve, a way to channel the dark, obsessive thoughts that haunted him during a stressful period. He sounded plausible. Terrifyingly plausible. Then, the lead prosecutor, a woman named Angela Vassar with the quiet tenacity of a glacier, took over the cross-examination. She started softly. Mr. Thorne, you described these writings as fiction. As a story. Yes, Leo said, nodding earnestly. Do you often research your stories? I suppose. To make them realistic. Did you research the structural integrity of wooden railings? A slight pause. Not specifically. Did you research the forensic timeline of a fall from that specific bluff? No. Did you research the login records of the Crestwood Prep Library database to know your own access to the Caldwell thesis would be documented? Leo blinked. The questions were coming faster, a gentle rain turning to hail. No, I didn't. Vassar walked to the evidence table. She picked up a stack of papers. The journal. The room seemed to lean forward. So, in this fictional story, she said, her voice dropping, you accidentally created a plan that perfectly aligned with unreleased, non-public forensic and digital evidence. The rock. The timing. The library logs. Is that your testimony? It was a coincidence. A dark, twisted coincidence. A coincidence, Vassar repeated. She opened the journal to a specific, highlighted entry. Let's talk about entry 9. Where you refer to Detective Reed as a predictable variable. Where you wrote, and I quote, her suspicion is an irritant, but not a threat. It is, in fact, a validation of the complexity of the design. Vassar looked up from the page, directly at Leo. Did you also predict in your fiction that a Detective Reed would be assigned to this case before she was assigned? Leo's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The blood drained from his face. The design, Vassar pressed, her voice now a razor. Is that what you called it? The design. It's a metaphor, Leo whispered. A metaphor for what? For a story? Or for a murder? She didn't wait for an answer. She turned to the jury, holding the pages aloft. This is not a story. This is a blueprint. And the defendant didn't just write it. He followed it. He built the crime exactly as designed. The only thing he didn't plan for was that we would ever get to read his architect's notes. She let the silence hang, thick and suffocating. Leo sat perfectly still on the stand, but something in him had fractured. The performance was over. All that was left was the pale, silent boy staring at the damning pages in her hand. The proof of his genius, now transformed into the proof of his guilt. The walls of his narrative weren't just cracking under pressure. They were being disassembled, brick by arrogant brick, in front of God and everyone. The air in the courtroom had been thick with argument, technicalities, the cold language of law. But on the final day of the trial, a different kind of truth entered the room. It walked in quietly, dressed in simple black, holding a single folded piece of paper. It was the truth of an empty seat at a dinner table. The truth of a silent phone. The truth of a future erased. Elena Flores, Maya's mother, took the stand not as a witness for the prosecution, but for the victim. This was her right, the victim impact statement. The room, which had been a theater of logic and strategy, suddenly became a church. A church for a funeral that never ended. She didn't look at Leo. She looked at the jury, and then past them, as if speaking to the ghost of her daughter in the back of the room. Her voice, when it came, wasn't the furious shout the crowd might have expected. It was soft, worn thin. It forced everyone to lean in, to strain to hear, making her words even heavier. "They talk about the facts of the case," she began. "The time, the place, the method. They have shown you a journal of cold, ugly words. But I am here to tell you about the silence." She unfolded the paper, not to read, but to have something to hold on to. "The silence in our house is a physical thing now. It's not quiet. Quiet is peaceful. This silence is loud. It's the sound of her laughter gone. It's the sound of her telling me about a book she just read, gone. It's the sound of her future, all the conversations we will never have about her college classes, her first job, her dreams. It all just stops. It ends in a terrible, echoing silence on October 19th. A juror in the front row bowed her head, wiping a tear away. "They have shown you what he took from her. A life. But they cannot show you what he took from us. He took the smell of her shampoo in the hallway. He took the specific way she would hum when she was concentrating. He took the light in my husband's eyes. He took my mother's heart, which gave out 3 weeks after the funeral. He took generations of us. He didn't just kill my daughter. He killed the family she was the heart of." Now, she finally turned her head. She looked directly at Leo. He had been staring at the table, at his hands, anywhere but at her. Now, he was forced to meet her gaze. "You wrote in your journal that she was a variable," Elena said, and for the first time, her voice trembled with a heat that wasn't quite anger, but a devastating maternal clarity. "You reduced my child to a symbol in your equation. Let me tell you about your variable." Her name was Maya. She was afraid of spiders, but would gently carry them outside on a piece of paper. She read poetry for the sound of the words. She made the world's worst scrambled eggs, but she'd make them for me every Mother's Day and we'd laugh. She wanted to be a librarian because she believed stories could save people. She was a person. She was my person. Leo's face, which had been a mask of strained control, began to twitch. A muscle in his jaw pulsed. He tried to hold her gaze, to treat her as another data point, another obstacle in his logic. But he couldn't. The raw, human wreckage in her eyes was a language his intellect could not parse. "You thought you were editing a story," Elena whispered, her words falling like stones into the silent room. "But you weren't. You were breaking a universe. My universe." She finished. She folded the paper back into a perfect, small square, a tiny fortress against the pain. She stepped down from the stand and walked back to her seat, her husband pulling her into the shelter of his arm. The judge asked if the defense had any questions. Leo's lead attorney, for the first time in the trial, simply said, "No questions, Your Honor." There was nothing to cross-examine. This wasn't evidence. It was the echo of the crime itself. And Leo Thorne, the brilliant logician, the arrogant architect of his own destiny, did something he had never done in the entire trial. He looked away. He dropped his head into his hands, not in a performative sob, but in a slow, defeated collapse. He could debate forensic science. He could twist the meaning of words. But he had no defense against the simple, unbearable weight of a mother's grief. It was the one variable his perfect design had never, ever accounted for. The jury was out for less than 4 hours. In a complex murder trial, that's not a deliberation. It's a formality. It's the time it takes for 12 people to sign their names to a truth that became undeniable. The buzz that went through the packed courtroom when the bailiff announced the jury had reached a verdict was less like electricity and more like a single, held breath being released all at once, a low, collective groan of anticipation. The families were brought back in. The reporters straightened. The judge took the bench. Leo was led to the defense table. He had put his suit of armor back on, the calm, intelligent mask. He stood straight beside his lawyers, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. He was running one final, desperate script in his mind: mistrial, hung jury, manslaughter, anything but the void. He could negotiate an appeal. He could survive a number of years. His intellect could find a way. Will the defendant please rise? His voice. The judge's voice. It was the same voice that would, in weeks, pronounce his sentence. But for now, it was just a voice asking him to stand for the verdict. Leo rose. He looked at the jury box, trying to read their faces. They looked back, their expressions unreadable as stone. The foreperson, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes that now held no kindness at all, stood with a piece of paper in her hand. "Madam Foreperson," the clerk said, "has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." "On the single count of murder in the first degree, how do you find?" The world shrank to the woman's mouth. Leo's entire being, his arrogance, his brilliance, his fear, was focused on the shape the next word would make. The foreperson didn't hesitate. She didn't stumble. She said the word clearly, cleanly, letting it drop into the silent room with the finality of a blade. Guilty. There was no gasp, no outburst. The word was so expected, so inevitable, it landed with a strange, anticlimactic thud. Maya's family clutched each other, a wave of relief so profound it looked like pain. His mother let out a choked sound, burying her face in her husband's shoulder. The senator did not cry. He just closed his eyes, as if computing the total, devastating cost of his son's failure. But Leo did nothing. He didn't collapse. He didn't scream. He just stood there. The word guilty didn't seem to hit him. It seemed to pass through him, leaving a hollow shell. His lawyer gently tugged his elbow, prompting him to sit. He complied, moving like a marionette. He lowered himself into his chair, his eyes fixed on the polished wood of the table in front of him. This was the moment the void opened up. For his entire life, every identity he had was a costume he chose. The golden boy, the valedictorian, the senator's son, the genius. Even the murderer was a role he'd played with chilling mastery. But guilty, that wasn't a role. It was a state of being. A final, permanent label applied by the world, rejecting every story he'd ever told. The verdict erased him. In an instant, Leonardo Thorne, the monument, ceased to exist. The person sitting in that chair was now just inmate number 73482. A number. A case file. A body to be housed until it decayed. His intellect, his plans, his arrogant designs, they were all meaningless now. They had no purchase on the reality of a concrete cell. He looked down at his hands, the hands that typed the journal, that pushed the railing. They were just hands now. Useless. The judge was speaking, scheduling the sentencing hearing, using words like remanded and custody. They were words for the thing in the chair. Not for Leo. Leo was already gone, swallowed by the verdict, by the yawning absolute void of a future that was no longer his to design. The gavel fell. It was over. And as the deputies came to lead the hollow thing that used to be Leo Thorne away, he finally moved. He looked up, not at his parents, not at the judge, but at the empty space above the prosecutor's table. His eyes were wide, baffled, and utterly, terribly empty. He had solved for every variable except the one that mattered, the weight of the word guilty. And it had crushed him into nothing. We began here, in this room, with the sound of a gavel and the collapse of a boy. Now, we understand why. The sentencing hearing was the final, formal scratching of the pen. The verdict had defined what he was. Today would decide where he would be. And for how long? The answer was, forever. Leo stood, again, before Judge Harold Whitmore. But the boy from the first day was gone. The defiant prince from the trial was gone. What remained was a pale, thin young man in a loose-fitting county jumpsuit, his eyes hollowed out by a month in a cell. The void had done its work. The judge didn't rush. He put on his glasses and looked over the reports, the psych evaluations, the trial transcripts. The air was thick and still. "Leonardo Thorne," he began, and his voice, that gravelly ancient voice, was the only sound in the universe. "We have heard the evidence. We have read your words. Your own, meticulous words." Leo stared at a point on the floor, as if hoping it would open up and swallow him. This court has seen many crimes of passion, of rage, of fear. This was none of those things. This was a crime of aesthetic, a crime of ideology. You killed Maya Flores because she did not fit the narrative of your superior life. You treated her murder as a logistical challenge to be optimized. You documented it as an artist would a sculpture. The judge leaned forward, his gaze like a weight. You wrote that you were operating on a higher logical plane. You believed your intellect placed you beyond the moral and legal universe that binds the rest of us. That is not brilliance. That is a profound and dangerous sickness of the soul. He took a breath, letting the indictment sink in, not just for Leo, but for the record, for history. The law exists precisely for those who believe themselves above it, to protect society from the cold calculus of people like you. There is no rehabilitation for a worldview that sees human beings as variables. There is only removal. Now, he picked up the final sentencing order. Therefore, the sentence of this court is fixed by law. You are hereby remanded to the custody of the Department of Corrections for the remainder of your natural life, without the possibility of parole. The gavel fell. The same sound. But this time, there was no sharp gasp. No dramatic buckling of knees. Leo simply shut down. His shoulders slumped forward, as if the last invisible string holding him up had been cut. He didn't look at his weeping mother. He didn't glare at Detective Reed, sitting calmly in the gallery. He stared at his own cuffed hands, and a single quiet tear tracked through the stubble on his cheek. It wasn't for Maya. It wasn't even for himself. It was the biological spillage of a system that had finally, completely crashed. The deputies took him by the arms. He went without resistance, a shell being emptied out. As he was led past the bar, he passed the prosecution table. For a fleeting second, his dead eyes met Detective Reed's. There was no hatred left. No intelligence. Just the flat, empty reflection of the 40, 50, 60 years of concrete and steel that now stretched before him. A tunnel with no light at the end. The monument was gone. All that was left was the sentence. And the terrible echoing silence that follows a door locking forever. A year is a long time, and no time at all. In Crestwood, the lawns are still green. The halls of the prep school echo with new dramas. The ridge in the nature reserve has a new, sturdy steel railing, bolted deep into the stone. People still walk there, but they don't linger. The town, in its way, has healed over the wound, but the scar is pale and sensitive to the touch. On a crisp autumn afternoon, 1 year to the day after the verdict, Detective Evelyn Reed didn't go to the office. She drove to St. Catherine's Cemetery. She wore plain clothes. In her hand was a single white rose. She found the headstone quickly. It was simple. Maya Flores. Beloved daughter. A light to all who knew her. Reed placed the rose against the cool granite. She didn't say anything out loud. She just stood there, listening to the wind in the old oaks, finally allowing the silence to be peaceful. Later that same day, in a maximum security facility 300 miles away, inmate number 73482 was in the prison library. Leo Thorne sat at a metal table, a textbook open in front of him. He was allowed to take college correspondence courses. A final bitter joke. He could still educate his mind, but he could never use it in the world. A group of other inmates were laughing loudly at a nearby table, a rough, jarring sound. One of them glanced at Leo, the scrawny kid with the dead eyes, and looked right through him. No fear. No recognition. No respect. Just nothing. He was irrelevant. It was the one punishment his brilliant mind had never conceived. Back in her car, Reed turned the key. The engine purred to life. She took one last look in the rearview mirror, not at the cemetery, but at the picture-perfect town behind her. Monsters aren't born in shadows. They're forged in the belief that the light only exists to shine on them. Leo Thorne thought he could outsmart consequence itself. But in the end, the only design that held up was the oldest one, the truth. It's heavier than arrogance. And it always finds the ground. And that's where we leave Crestwood. A community changed, a family healing, and a brilliant mind locked in a permanent, self-made dark. This was the story of an arrogant monster who built his own cage. If this narrative gripped you, if you felt that chill of justice served, then you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. I'm constantly hunting for the most twisted, real-feeling psychological thrillers to break down. Let me know in the comments what shocked you the most. Was it the journal, the mother's testimony, or Leo's final, empty stare? Your thoughts fuel this channel. Until next time, remember, no one is above the reach of a consequence they themselves built. Stay curious.